I kind of struggle with what it is because I think of myself as being just prepared for what is likely to happen. But then that creates a stigma of like being a prepper.
This is Giovani Lampassi. Giovani is a cinematographer based in Los Angeles. He's worked on shows like Party Down and Up All Night. He's currently on hit Fox show Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And he's known amongst his friends and colleagues as being uber prepared. Most specifically, the apple of the eye of his preparedness is having a 72-hour earthquake-ready bag in the back of his car. He is so passionate about this, in fact, that he's dedicated a whole blog to it. He encourages all of his coworkers and family members to have one, and he's spent hours and hours of his personal time combing over the details of his bag and perfecting it to a science. This is Mostly Minutia, episode 4, 72-hour bag. In this episode, you'll find out what is a 72-hour bag, what goes in one and why, and how Giovani became so passionate about this. Here's Gio.
I don't really know where I fit in the whole thing. I mean, ever since I was a little kid, I was backpacking, camping. I've gone to National Outdoor Leadership School. I've done, all kinds of stuff. In 2005, though, is when a big switch flipped for me. I was on location doing a movie, a Hilary Swank movie called The Reaping, and we were in Louisiana when Hurricane Katrina hit. While Warner Brothers evacuated us to Austin, and they got a jet and they got us out. So we were in Austin for 5 days, but we went back to continue shooting. And right when we went back is when everybody was just beginning to come out of New Orleans and come up to Baton Rouge where we were. So I saw firsthand what happened to even a city that hadn't been devastated by the hurricane. It was on the periphery. How quickly the police were overwhelmed. The fire department was basically unresponsive. What the people who had been in the hurricane were having to deal with basically only what they had left of their life in a garbage bag. And this was with FEMA, Red Cross, everybody already in place in Baton Rouge, and they couldn't handle it. I also saw bands of people who were driving around in pickup trucks with guns saying that it was their way or the highway, basically. Like they were running the show. So it got me thinking about our situation here in California and how we work in the film industry, and we have what's called the 30-mile zone. They have a 30-mile circumference that goes around the Los Angeles County. And according to union regulations, we can work anywhere within that 30-mile zone, and productions don't have to pay housing per diem or travel costs that are more than just normal everyday costs that they would absorb. So we do 99% of our shooting within the 30-mile zone. We do, locations that look like Iraq or locations that look like New York City. Everything can be found within that 30-mile zone in Los Angeles. If the Northridge earthquake had happened at, say, 10:30 or 11 o'clock in the morning, all of us in the film industry would have been at our jobs, someplace on location or at a studio within that 30-mile zone.
For those of us who don't know much about the Northridge earthquake, the quake with a magnitude of 6.7 hit Los Angeles San Fernando Valley at 4:30 a.m. on Monday, January 17, 1994, killing 57 and injuring over 7,000. Typically at that time on a Monday, the freeways would have been packed. But because it was a holiday, Martin Luther King Day, most people were still at home in their beds, sleeping.
So it got me thinking, if I got stuck in my car, what would be the things I would need to be able to get me home to my family? A lot of people have either a 72-hour bag, a get-home bag, a go bag. There's all kinds of little catchphrases that people have come up with. I like the term 72-hour bag because I think that you should have the necessities able to sustain your life for 72 hours. And those break down into a couple categories. We have the rule of threes. You have 3 minutes of no oxygen, 3 hours of no shelter, 3 days of no water, and 3 weeks without food. So each of those things you should be able to sustain yourself for 72 hours, especially if there's an earthquake and you're 60 miles or so away from your house. The ability to be able to walk, even in adverse conditions, under stressful conditions of a disaster, you should be able to. That's 72 hours is a good buffer, and that's why I like the term 72-hour bag versus a go bag, because a go bag is like, well, I've got my mascara, I've got my blush, and I've got this, that, and the other thing.
Let's go.
That's my go bag. But if you're thinking like 72 hours, all right, what do I need to sustain life for 72 hours in adverse conditions? One of the big factors for me is this is a backpack I hope that I will never have to use. So I'm not going to spend $150, $200 on a backpack that's going to sit in the trunk of my car. So I found this brand that I love, which is called LA Police Gear, and they're at lapolicegear.com. They have 2 backpacks that I love. One is the 3-day operator backpack, which is $25, and they have another backpack that is a 72-hour backpack, which I use, is $49, and it is killer. So it spills completely open. This is sort of my fire starting pouch. I've got a Zippo lighter that's sealed in an airtight container. It's actually an experiment I'm doing to see how long it'll last. But a Zippo lighter is really good because you can still start a fire even if it has no fuel, because it produces spark. In here I also have a penny can stove. It's made out of a Diet Coke can. You pour fuel directly into it, and it vaporizes after a second. It becomes a good stove that you can boil water in 3 minutes. And it's the weight of 1/3 of a pop can. And then I carry a military-style can opener, because being able to open a can in the middle of nowhere is important. Yeah, I try and keep everything that is, that's got to do with fire or first aid in some kind of Ziploc bag. If it's been an earthquake, there's going to be a lot of debris and dust, and also if it's raining, I want to make sure that things stay dry. So my other side pouch, I've got windproof matches, waterproof matches. I've got steel wool. And I keep the steel wool in a Ziploc bag because I don't want the steel wool to come in contact with anything like a battery, because using a battery on steel wool is a great way of starting fire. And then here's my flashlight. I love this flashlight. This flashlight is just a 9-volt battery with an LED attached on the outside. Cool. And it's got a great amount of light that it puts out for very little weight. And I keep Velcro on it so that if I need to create it into a headlamp or stick it somewhere, I can do that. And I carry extra Velcro with me. So in the front pouch here, I've got one of my med kits. This is a Adventure Medical Kit Ultralight 0.9. I like this size because it's small enough, it's water resistant, but yet there's room to add stuff in there if you need to. I've got Celox, which is a great military grade blood clot, and this is a cellulose material that does not create a burn when you're putting it into a wound, whereas the other stuff, which is called Quick Clot, it's 2 chemicals and it cauterizes the wound, so it burns you to stop the bleeding.
So painful.
It's very painful. I have a buddy who's a former Navy SEAL medic, and he said he used to carry both, and he'd use Celox on the guys he liked and Quick Clot on the guys he didn't like. I also have some highly illegal super heavy-duty antibiotic pills in here, which are like, if I came in contact with something really bad and I couldn't get to an emergency room, I'd take that. It's basically a 3-day dose. I always carry crazy glue because that's probably your best bet for sealing a wound versus using sutures, which I do carry. I carry sutures, and I'm trained in how to suture, but I think that the chances of me suturing somebody in the field would be nil because there's too many complications. So this med kit is really good. It's a little bit of an advanced med kit. I carry 2 N95 particulate masks. It filters out most of dangerous chemicals and things, or particulate matter. And then the last thing I carry in this front pouch is of vital importance. It's a spoon. You should make sure you have a pair of gloves because you never know when you're going to have to move debris or anything like that. and you don't want to cut your hand. And then I carry a flask, and I like bourbon. So I carry bourbon with me because if something's gone down, I'm sure I'm going to want to have a shot of bourbon before going to bed at night. So then we open up the next layer, and in here I've got a map of the Los Angeles County and vicinity, because even though you think you know the streets well, you may need to reorient yourself. I've got a waterproof notepad in case I need to leave notes, or, you know, if, say, you came upon somebody and you provided some kind of medical assistance, you want to be able to write down what you did, what time you did it, leave that with them if you have to leave. So I also carry a pen. This is a suture syringe medic kit, and this is really designed for people who are traveling overseas to a third world nation. So that if you have to go to their emergency room, you can go in with your own suture, your own IV, and needles and everything, and know that you're handing them a sterile piece of gear. Because in a lot of third world nations, they reuse their stuff, boil it or whatever, but it's not really sterile. So having a little kit like this, they sell it at REI, is really good. And I carry it with me because it's not that much weight. It's only like half an ounce. Because if for some reason there was a huge event that happened and it was a mobile clinic or something, chances are they're going to have good gear. But if I can come in with my own gear and not tax their system, then that will help out even more. Let's see what else do I have. And then I have a compass. This is just a typical compass that you'd have for backpacking. This one's not great because it's got a bubble in there, but I know in Southern California, the chances of us getting freezing temperatures are not great. And then lastly, what I have in here, this is where some advanced life-saving comes in. This is a full trauma kit. In this trauma kit is trauma shears. I've got a nasal pharyngeal, which is to open up an airway through a nasal passage. I've got a big bag of Celox, which would be more for a leg wound to an artery where you need a huge quantity of Celox. I've got a chest seal for in case somebody had an impaled lung and they were having what's called a sucking chest wound. I have some burn gel. I've got a tourniquet. I've got an Israeli bandage, an ACE bandage. I've got a chest decompression needle in case the cavity of their chest was filling up with blood or air and you needed to relieve that pressure. Now, I did a course in tactical medic stuff. I am not a medic. I did the course because I always think it's better to know than to not know. I do not have any professional medical training. You do not need professional medical training to do anything to yourself. And that's the main reason I have this, is that if something happened to me, it would be stuff that I would use on me. If I came across somebody that I knew, chances are I probably use this stuff on them. But legally, you're not supposed to do any of this stuff to a human being that is not yourself. But there's no law saying you can't do anything to save your own life. And let's go in the main compartment. I carry 2 flares because they are great for starting fires in an emergency or signaling. I carry a bandana because there's 30 uses for a bandana, which you can read about on my blog, everything from filtering water to tourniquets to all that kind of stuff. I carry an SOL, which is a Survive Outdoors Longer brand thermal bivy. I like the thermal bivy because it's got a little bit more mass to it. It's a little bit more like a sleeping bag, but it's small enough that it's only about 8 inches long and 4 inches, 6 inches in diameter. If you get into this with your clothes on at night, you'll probably keep warm in conditions down to 20 degrees, 30 degrees. Wow. Not saying you won't be cold at night, but you'll survive, which is the important thing. I carry 2 MREs, which are meals ready to eat, and the ones that I have are by a company called APAC. After a whole bunch of research, I found that APAC, for my needs, were the best. The thing I like about these is that they're civilian brand or civilian level, but they have heaters in them, which means that you don't need to start a fire. You don't have to worry about anything. You just pour some water in. It activates the heater. It hydrates the meal. And in 12 to 15 minutes, you have a hot meal that's 1,200 calories. So I figure if something happens on a Monday, I have food Monday night and Tuesday night, and then Wednesday I'm home. And I also carry, these are great little emergency food rations. They're made by a company called Mainstay, and they're 2,400 calories each. And they're individually wrapped little, basically shortbread cookies. The most important thing when looking at an emergency ration is to make sure it's It meets U.S. Coast Guard qualifications, and it's not thirst-provoking. Not only if you were out at sea, but if you're in a survival situation where in Southern California where you're in the middle of a desert and water is scarce, you don't want to have to drink a ton of water to wash down something that you're eating. Mm-hmm. So these are great to get me through the day when I'm traveling from point A to point B. I also have in here a life straw. And this is a water purifier. It's not a filter, it's a purifier. There's a difference between filters and purifiers. Filters are just, they'll just filter out large particulate. Purifiers will make sure that they filter down to 99.99999%, which is Giardia, other bacteria and protozoa. The United Nations gives these away in Africa. And if you see the type of water that they're drinking with the life straw, you know that you can pretty much drink out of anything here in Los Angeles. The only thing it doesn't do, which is what I think is the scariest part, is it doesn't do chemicals. And no real filtration or purification system deals with chemicals. So if there was a chemical leak somewhere, you have to evaluate the water, and sometimes chemicals have no odor, no taste, and that's a big risk that you take when you're drinking water out in the field. I carry with me this little guy, which is now my favorite stove. This is the MSR micro rocket stove, and it folds open. Now, the only reason I have a stove with me is in case I need to boil water for purification.
So in that case, then, if there was a chemical situation, then you could purify it, right?
Well, it depends on what the boiling point of the chemical is. There's no good answer for dealing with chemicals because you have to know what the chemical is and how to deal with it. Okay, so then I carry this guy, and it's just a military grade poncho. It's got grommets and snaps, and I've used this backpacking as my shelter. I keep some paracord in there so I can string it up, and it's a great little shelter. And then I carry an old camping cup, and then in that I carry emergency water in a stuff sack, and they look like little juice boxes. And I carry these because, if I have to get out of someplace real quick, I know I can grab this bag, and I've got at least a quart of water in here.
I feel like the way that you've packed your bag is like Tetris.
Everything has its place. I carry this straight fixed blade knife. It's a Gerber. It's a really good knife for its weight. And then in here I also carry a jacket, which is sort of a double redundant jacket because if you work in the film biz, you're always carrying a couple layers of clothes with you anyway. So the last piece of the puzzle is in the back of the backpack is a whole compartment with my hydration bladder. So it looks like almost like an old school hot water bottle, and then off the bottom of it there's a hose with a mouthpiece so that you can have the hose come over your shoulder while you're walking. And the pressure of the backpack against your back allows you to drink the water as you move. So you don't have to have a separate bottle or anything like that. But you do need a way of purifying it. And that holds like 1.5 liters of water. And that's basically it.
Can you describe to people what the difference between a prepper and a survivalist is?
Well, I think a prepper is anybody that has taken precaution or prepared for some kind of event. And I don't think it matters whether it's a natural disaster, a terrorist threat, or just preparing for a time when you may be unemployed. A survivalist, I think, is somebody that can go into the woods with a knife and fend for themselves for an extended period of time. It can go a bunch of different ways. Are you a survivalist that's a backpacker? Sure, you could be. Are you a survivalist that carries an AK-47 and doesn't like the government? Sure, you could be. Are you a prepper if you have an earthquake kit? Yep. I never feel like I'm as prepared as I can be. I think it's always something that it's not only is it a perishable skill in some ways, which is one of the reasons I love going backpacking as often as I can, because I feel like I test things and you're always honing your skill. And your items in your 72-hour bag go bad, and you have to continually keep on those things. You have to remain vigilant what kind of gear is available? Is there something better out there that you should have that you didn't have before? It's a big balancing act between wasting money and having things that are necessary. It's almost like a hobby that you have to dedicate time to.
Would you call yourself an expert?
I don't think so. I don't consider myself an expert at anything. I don't like calling myself an expert because I think an expert is somebody like, a Navy SEAL or somebody who does it for a living. I don't do it for a living. I do it because I feel that there's a need for it. I've got knowledge, and I'd like to pass on that knowledge. I think that my knowledge base is higher than 90% of the people out there, but I still think that there's people that I learn from, because I always look at it as that no matter what I'm doing, there's always room to learn. And as long as there's room to learn, I feel uncomfortable saying that you're an expert.
Do you think that a lot of people who are prepped kind of hide and are under the radar and don't let people know that they're prepared?
Yeah, I think actually one of the things I hate about myself is that I've let the cat out of the bag. People, I can't tell you how many people say that they're going to come to my house, and I so don't want people to come to my house, Yeah, and I think that, that's one of what people talk about a lot is operational security, OPSEC. Don't let your neighbors know that you have a supply of water and food at your house. As much as you want to help people, I don't think there's any way that you can prepare for 20 people showing up at your house when you need 1 gallon of water per person per day.
Is there anything that like you can think of that actually scares you?
Yeah, the thing that scares me the most, I think, is something that is so far out of our control that I think that if an earthquake happens, a lot of people are going to die. I think that if there's a terrorist attack, I think that there would be a lot of freaking out. But the thing that I fear the most is some type of pandemic. It's something that's so far out of your control. Like what they're experiencing over in Africa right now. If Ebola suddenly goes airborne or, gets out in a different way or mutates in some sort of way, that to me is the most frightening thing. And I read in a book that the Centers for Disease Control recommends that you be able to shut your front door and lock it for 90 days. I've been scouring the CDC website trying to find that quote to be able to put it in my blog, and I can't find it anywhere. So I need to go back to the book that I found it in. But the thought of shutting your front door and locking it and letting no one in and no one out for 90 days, how many of us have the supplies in your house to last for 90 days? Like having a 72-hour bag is fine. Having an earthquake kit at home where I have 10 days of supplies and 10 days of water for my family and my pets, that's fine. But being able to shut the door for 90 days until a pandemic burns out, that's a whole different level of preparedness. And that's the thing that scares me the most, I think. Because getting to that level, then you're sort of in the crazy pot. Then you have like a cellar full of food and, like you've got 1,000-gallon water tank, and all this stuff to a point where you're really getting paranoid.
Yeah, and then at what point do you make that call?
At what point can you convince your wife that you need to spend $5,000 on food?
I've often noticed about you that you are a person you're in the solution. That saying, like, don't be in the problem, be in the solution. Mm-hmm. But I feel like you will recognize that there is a problem, but then you're automatically thinking about the solutions.
Yeah, but who knows? I mean, when the shit hits the fan, I might be the first one screaming with my hands over my head, running around in a circle. Mm-hmm. And I hope that I'm being part of the solution. I think one of the big things about, getting in the mindset to deal with an emergency is thinking through what gear you have, what steps needed to be done. Do you know the ABCs? You know, your airway, your breathing, your circulation. And knowing all those little steps is what helps you be prepared so that when an emergency hits, you don't act like a chicken with your head cut off, that you can evaluate the situation and figure out what the protocol is to deal with the situation.
This episode was produced by me, Colleen Lindell. Thank you, Gio, for sharing your story and your well-researched knowledge on your 72-hour bag. I now have one in my car. You can find the entire list for Gio's 72-hour bag, tons more survival information, and the first 3 chapters of Gio's novel, Will It, on Gio's blog at 72hourbagsocal.com. You can also go to my website, ColleenLindell.com, where I've posted specific links to some of the manufacturers Gio mentioned, as well as CERT LA, which is an earthquake preparedness class taught by the LA Fire Department for free, as well as a link to the LA QuakeBot, which you can follow on Twitter. The QuakeBot will literally tweet you every time there's something as small as even a rattle in the earth. It will tweet you the magnitude and the specific coordinates of where the quake occurred. I also want to promote a great documentary called Mine, M-I-N-E, that came out in 2009 about the pets in Hurricane Katrina who became separated from their owners. This documentary is excellent. The film follows several pets and how the owners of these pets continually search for them. If you go to my site, there is a link to the trailer. And now, I couldn't help myself. I've included a few deleted sound clips from my interview with Gio because, let's face it, sometimes there is just no fat to trim, and I ultimately have director's cut. What's cool about ham radios?
Well, ham radios, it's similar to a CB, but a CB is limited by the FCC as to how many watts you can broadcast with and how many frequencies you have access to. If you're a ham radio operator, even the lowest level, which is the technician class, which is what I am, you have thousands of frequencies and you have unlimited wattage, and you can build your own radio legally. So you can take pieces and parts, put them together, and customize what you need for your own application. So I have a ham radio in my car, and I have one that I carry with me because you want to be able to communicate. If there's an issue and you're out of cell range or the cell towers are down, ham radios will still work. And ham radios are a great thing to learn. It's $30 to take the class, take your test, get your license, and that license lasts for 10 years, and you can get radios for as cheap as $50. So it's a really, really accessible way of communicating in an emergency. I have solar panels on my house. Now, if the electric grid goes down, the solar panels turn off, basically. The solar panel itself produces energy, but the inverter doesn't allow the energy to travel from the solar panel into my house. Now, if you have a battery backup system on your house, you'll have energy stored in those batteries that will sustain electrical devices for a while. But if the inverter has turned off and you have no way of recharging those batteries, eventually they'll go down. So what I've done is I've created a battery backup system that's mobile, that is capable of powering 3,000 watts of electricity, so it's small, but it'll do my refrigerator, my ham radio, charge cell phones. I've got a string of Christmas LED Christmas lights attached to it so that if I need to light the house at night, I can string the lights all through the house. There's 100 feet of light. And on that apparatus, I have a solar charge controller that needs one of my 24 solar panels. So if something bad has happened, I can always unwire at least one of those solar panels will be good, and I can send a wire down to the recharger, and that will maintain the batteries almost indefinitely. Well, we always say, everything's fine until the zombies come walking up your driveway, right? And people around me who don't really know me think that I'm talking about zombies as like The Walking Dead. But really, zombies are just a metaphor for anybody that's coming to take your shit. And like, do I think that the whole zombie genre is fun? Yeah, I think it's hilarious. But in reality, what I'm talking about is when something's gone wrong and people are so emboldened that they're going to come up to your house and they're going to try and take what you have. That's when the zombies are walking.